I'm Xenia, author of these books, and today we're going to be talking about my editing process. Now, editing is a mammoth task, so I'm going to be breaking this into the two types of editing: content editing and copy editing. Content editing is making sure your story flows well, that your characters have depth, that your plot has structure, and all the other little things that make a story great. Copy editing, on the other hand, is making sure your prose is as strong as it can be. So you're using the right language, you're spelling it correctly, and you're using grammar that makes sense. Both types of edits are critical to making your story as polished as possible. So, you've just finished your rough draft. Now what? When I finish a rough draft, I like to step away from it for at least a couple of weeks. Often I'll have other projects on the go that I can change my focus to, and sometimes I'll just use the break to think about anything but writing and relax for a bit. But this break isn't just for R&R. Right now, your story is fresh in your mind. You might even be a bit sick of it. And if you're like me, you're liable to glaze over if you go back to it right away. Instead, give yourself some time to forget the book a little. Come back to it with fresh eyes. You want to return to your project with a reader's mindset, not the writer's. When you're ready, read your book for the first time. If you can afford to, get it printed double-spaced on physical paper or on a paper-like device like a Remarkable. Many people actually have better reading comprehension and will catch more errors on paper than they would on a screen. Plus, it's easier on your eyes. Take your time, and if you catch yourself glazing over, go back to the last thing you remember and keep going. Give your story the attention it deserves. If you find you keep glazing over, take a break, step away from it. Have a pen and a highlighter handy, and make notes directly on your manuscript. You want to catch as much as you can in this step. Sections that are boring, typos, or pieces that just kind of lose you a little bit or don't make sense. Keep an eye out for parts that feel gratuitous or stilted or wrong in some way. Even if you can't put your finger on why, highlight them and make a note. Critically, this isn't where you're going to fix those things, you're just catching them. At this point, I usually make a new copy of my manuscript. I mark one pre-edit and have the other just be the working copy, and go through all of my notes and address them one by one throughout the manuscript. This can create cascading changes and really big pivots, but this is the time to do that. Saving a copy of your work is really important because that means that you're going to feel more free to make big changes because you can always return to the old state if you want to. You might try more transformative changes than you would otherwise. At this point, you have what I would refer to as a first draft. Next, you want someone else to read it. There are going to be things you miss just because you're so familiar with the story and the characters and the prose. You're going to need backup to find those things. If you have the funds, hire an editor for what's called a developmental edit. This is another word for a content edit or a substantive edit, I think it's called. There are great options on services like Fiverr or companies like Press that'll help indie authors. But be advised, many of these services are incentivized to push you to using more of their services. They might recommend additional layers of editing that you may not necessarily need. And that can get expensive, so take what they say with a grain of salt and be wary of signing up for additional services. That doesn't mean you won't need additional edits, but trust your gut on that one. If money's a little tighter, reach out to friends and family that read in your genre. You can also find online communities for alpha and beta readers, or swap manuscripts with other indie authors for a mutual edit. Especially if they're not professionals, give your alpha and beta readers a timeline. 4 to 6 weeks usually works for me, and supply them with a list of questions that you want answers to so they have them up front. This will help them understand what feedback you're looking for so they can be more mindful about their reading. Here's a list of questions you might want to ask. Specific questions about sections you were unsure of during your read-through. Did anything make them want to put the book down? Did they feel bored at any point? How did they find the pacing of the novel? Did any characters fall flat for them? Did they notice any phrases repeated too often? Were they confused or lost at any point? How can I make the story stronger? What weaknesses did the story have? What was your favorite part? What did you love? And what other thoughts do you have about the piece? You don't need to act on every point you're told, whether you're working with a professional or an amateur. But be sure to look at each point critically. It can be really hard to kill your darlings, but you need to do what's best for your story. Criticism can be heartbreaking to hear, but it's all in service of strengthening your story and growing your skills. If you receive the same feedback from multiple people, it's definitely something that needs addressing. Once you have this feedback in hand, it's time to roll up your sleeves and apply it. Some writers will practically rewrite their books at this point. Happily, I haven't had to do that yet, but I will make sweeping changes. I'll rearrange scenes and alter text to fix what needs fixing, addressing character arcs, plot holes, and the like. I call this stage the overhaul for obvious reasons. When you've finished, read it again yourself and wrangle in any additional readers or editors you can to give it one more go over. When you make big changes, it can be really easy to throw things out of alignment or miss places that needed updating. This step is to catch those. This is the point in my process where I'd usually switch to doing a copy edit. Over the years, I've come up with a routine that works really well for me as someone with no English degree and a heavy reliance on spell check. Depending where you live, you might need to make a decision on what dialect of your language you want to use. I'm Canadian, so we kind of use a mix of UK and American spellings. But generally speaking, you want to pick one or the other, or make it a very conscious choice if you're going to use different ones. The key is to be consistent. You don't want to spell neighbor with a U, like the UK spelling, in one place, and without, like the American spelling, in another. Be consistent throughout your books. Likewise with units of measure like kilometers and miles, pounds and kilos, that kind of thing. I would recommend noting down what you are using in all of these points in your reference document, because at some point you're going to forget, and it'll be good to have one easy spot to go and check. My number one recommendation for doing a thorough copy edit is to read your work aloud. It'll force you to pay more attention to what's written on the page, and you'll be more likely to catch awkward rhythms, run-on sentences, repetition, and other common pitfalls more easily. It's also free and requires very little skill, which I'm always a supporter of. If you're just starting out, there are some easy ways to strengthen your writing right away. Keep your tense consistent. An example of a shifting tense would be John took the apple and cuts it. It should be either John took the apple and cut it, or John takes the apples and cuts it. Flipping between tenses or narration styles can be extremely jarring to readers. There are a few styles you can use when you're writing a book. I'll put their definitions on the screen in case you're not familiar. And the most common of them are first person, third person, and third person omniscient. Pick one and stick to it. If you do choose to swap for another partway through your book, make sure there's a really good thematic reason for the change. Make sure it makes sense to do so. Next up, ensure your dialogue is formatted correctly. I'll add a link to my favorite article that I reference all the time on how to do this in the description. Next up, cut long sentences in two. Reading aloud really helps with this one. Long sentences often bury the point. You'll need to keep some of them, but stay vigilant for those that can be dissected. Next up is crutch words. In English, we have a lot of words that people fall back on out of habit, and they can really weaken your writing. Most new writers and many seasoned ones have a lot of trouble with these. If you find these in your writing, there's like a 95% chance that removing or replacing them will strengthen your work. Here are the ones that I struggled with the most. To be verbs like is, was, were, had been, has been. These are often used where a more active verb would be a better fit. I was running down the street is a weaker sentence than I ran down the street. Likewise, had. I had known about the affair versus I knew about the affair. Others on our list are very or really, thing, that, started to or began, in order to, and adverbs. Adverbs are words that end in ly. So for example, I walked angrily into the kitchen could be stronger as I stormed into the kitchen. I'd also like to give a special mention to homonyms, words that sound the same or very similar but are spelled differently. These are my absolute bane. Things like bear or bear, aid, aid, tenant, tenets, altar, altar, altar. You get the gist. Also keep an eye out for words or turns of phrases that you use repeatedly. We all have prose that we love or we feel fills a common need. For me, I have a lot of horrified characters and sickening moments in my books, so I have to curve my use of Oria's gorge rises or Dacre fought his rising gorge. It will start to get noticeable and annoying to readers if the same word or phrase shows up too close together or too often in a work. Even if it isn't repeated a lot within the whole book, try to avoid using the same word within, say, a few sentences of itself. Obviously, there are exceptions, but it's a good thing to watch out for. As an example, he trudged through the snow falling from the trees around him in the thaw. As he arrived, he stomped the snow from his boots. The word snow just starts to sound weird at that point. After strengthening your prose, you'll need to do one last proofread to make sure you don't have any spelling or grammar errors. If well done, this makes your work look much more polished. The easiest way to start is by using your word processor's spell check option. They might not be right on every point, and they'll struggle a lot with things like names, especially if you write fantasy, but they'll catch little things that slip through the cracks, and it's usually worth doing. If you can, get a professional copy editor or proofreader. If you can't afford that, consider trying to find a scholar who might be able to do it cheaply. University students in their 3rd or 4th years have had to write so many papers and are usually pretty good at spotting mistakes and have a good attention to detail. Plus, they might be willing to do it more affordably. If not, you can try rereading your piece one more time, but there's a good chance your familiarity will cause you to miss mistakes that are still there. I have heard of people reading their work backwards, so they have to pay attention to each word, but personally, that would drive me insane. You can also use special tools like Grammarly and things like that, which are a more powerful version of a word processor spell check, but again, they usually cost a bit of money. So that's my editing process in all its glory. Fix the structure and the content first, involve outsiders, fix your prose, and proofread. Feel free to check out my books in the description below, and if you could like and subscribe to my channel, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy writing.